Thank you very much. Where did we start with this? Back in 2011, everyone was talking about social investment, and as a foundation, lots of other foundations were talking about it as well, and were saying, how are you going to get involved in social investment? And it was a bit like the abominable snowman that, many people talked about it, but few had ever seen it. And so we were looking around and saying, how do we engage with this? How can we use our money in a different way? And we looked at what was happening in England, and Toby and his team were very active. Lots of talk about social impact bonds. Peterborough was being launched, and nothing was happening in Scotland. And we looked around in Scotland and said, well, what could we do here? And what we thought was, well, really, there's about 5 tests that we wanted to use if we were going to look at a new approach, and that would be the lens that we would look at things through. The first of them was, will this bring new money to the sector? Secondly, will it be a focus on preventative spend? As you know, in Scotland, we had the Christie report, which was incredibly powerful and in many ways was a paradigm shifter, and trying to look at preventative rather than reactive spending. Third thing was that the third criteria was we wanted to minimise the transaction cost of it, because we could see that, for example, one of the criticisms, and sorry, Toby, one of the criticisms was that with SIBs, there was a big transaction cost. And we thought, well, we really want a model that tries to minimise that transaction cost. As a funder, one of the things we were really keen to do was to improve sustainability. And as a funder, those of you who are funders know, sustainability is something that we really strive for. We put our money in, we put it in for a period of time, and at the end of it, what happens? How is that wonderful service that's being provided, that new innovation, how is it actually working, and how is it being sustained? The other thing was in terms of risk and return, and we felt it was a criteria of any model should be that it should be fairly spread. In Scotland, we had an unusual landscape in that we had a thing called a public social partnership. And this was something that started back in 2006, 2007 by the Scottish Government. There was, I think, 6 of them started then as trials. And by the time we looked at it in 2011, there were 16 trial PSPs that were happening in Scotland. And we thought, these are interesting, and we'll have a look at them. Now, the model is basically a co-production model. It came from Italy originally, and this was really about how the public sector and the third sector could come together to co-produce new services. We liked it. We liked the new relationship. And I think it was alluded to earlier about the relationship between government and charities. And we could see more and more of the relationship which was master-servant, commission services, short-term, deliver this for this amount of money. And this PSP looked at a different model. And it was about partnership, and it was about a parity of esteem, the charity and the local authority working together. One of the things was that it focused mainly on new services, and that had strengths and weaknesses as well. However, in terms of the PSP model, we felt there were weaknesses within it. First of all, it failed in terms of it wasn't new money that it was bringing in. There was no evaluation built into the model, or actually of the model itself. They hadn't been evaluated. It was a slow model because it was co-production of new services. It tended to be a long time before things could actually get going. There was no clear role for funders in there. And obviously, as a funder, we thought, well, how could we influence these? How could we engage with them? But as you can see, there's no clear model there of how we could be involved. Also, how do you achieve scale in this? Each one of them was relatively small. Each one was relatively fixed and narrow in terms of its focus. How do you try and achieve scale with this model? The other thing was, and you'll see that there's the trial period and then it goes on after that, there's actually no sustainability with a PSP. What happens is that the local authority will endeavour, it will be their intention to maintain it if the outcomes are met, but there is no obligation on them to do that. The other weakness that we came across was that at the end of the trial there was a tendering process and a procurement process was run at that stage, and what was happening was a lot of the charities were saying they were really worried by that because they could have invested several years of intellectual property and that may disappear if someone came in and undercut them during the procurement. So, what did we do? We wanted to overcome some of these issues, and we worked with CMS And what we did was that we developed a contract framework. And this contract was basically to say, if these outcomes are met after the trial period, Mr. Local Authority, you are contractually obliged to maintain the service for this number of periods thereafter. So, what we saw was there was benefits because there was clear outcome targets and they were set at the beginning. There was independent evaluation was built into this because what the contract said was there will be an independent person that will say, have these outcomes been met? It wasn't just around new co-produced models, it was actually, you could use existing preventative, so charities could come along with something they've already got evidence for and actually try and run that. It was sustainable, but only to a degree, because what we were saying was funders would take on the risk during the trial period, and then the local authority would sustain it for X periods after, if successful. We wanted to use a standard framework, so it was relatively easy, and they also worked very hard on getting a legal light framework, and we really condensed it down to about 4 or 5 pages, so it was relatively straightforward. Drawback again, though, it failed our own test, and that was there was still no new money. There was no new money came into this. Also scalability, how do we get this bigger? And this gentleman over here, Colin, I remember him very clearly saying to me, as a funder, you will not solve this problem. This is too big for you as a funder. At the end of the day, we're like the flea in the back of an elephant. So how do we get scale? And his challenge to me was, he said, you need debt in this model. So, we listened to what this man said, and what we did was we constructed the model with a debt fund in that. So what we've done is we've taken a PSP, we've added a contract, and now we've added a debt fund. And Pauline Graham, who runs social business, she said, this is not a PSP, you cannot call it a PSP. So we changed the name of it because we felt we had migrated so far, and we called it Social Bridging Finance. Because the idea behind this is to go from high-cost reactive models to provide money, to keep them going at the same time. It's new money, but which will allow you to start new preventative spend models, which will then run at the same time, generate savings, and allow you over time to stop the high-cost, reactive, acute-type services. So what we've got is a fund, and you'll see that it's got a slice there. What we were saying was we wanted to take the fund, and it would be bank debt, straightforward commercial bank debt. And we spoke to RBS about this, and they were very supportive and very open to this idea. But in amongst that, there would be a slug of patient capital. And that patient capital, we were suggesting, would be about 30%. And that patient capital would want a lower rate of interest, or perhaps no rate of interest on it. What that does then is it lowers the cost of the whole model. It dilutes down the interest rate. So for example, if you're borrowing bank debt at 2.5%, with the 30% patient capital brings it down to about 1.75, which became very attractive then to local authorities and others who would be potentially borrowing this. You'll see that the model there is that the debt is not secured on the charity, but on the local authority's balance sheet, which has got immense attraction, as you can imagine, to the lenders because it's secure, it's blue chip. In terms of procurement, it's the whole service that's procured, it's not just at the trial point, so it's the whole thing that's procured. So that overcomes a lot of the procurement problems. We liked it because risk and return are aligned. We liked it because it brings new money into the system. And we liked it as a funder because if you think back to the model of the contract, we were funding that trial period with a grant. Now what we're doing is we're putting patient capital in there and that money will circulate round. So it's lent and then it's repaid back. So our money circulates round and is used multiple times. And as a funder, that's very attractive. It has no state aid implications in it. It has no government money in it. And also it can be tailored. You could have a short project if you wanted, or you could have one that lasted for 10 or 15 years. It just depends. And the beauty of this is it could be flexible about it. We had a lot of problems with Treasury and the problem around borrowing money for revenue expenditure. But there is obviously dispensation that they had around invest to save. Finally, we think that this model has got wide implications. It could be used not just with local authorities, it could be used with health boards, it could be used with central government, lots of different organisations could use this model to engage with the good practice and the good models that the third sector is able to provide. So a little worked example there about borrowing of £600 goes to the charity through the contract. The charity works for the 3 years, costing £200 per year during the trial. And after the trial, if successful, as you can see, this model, it's saying it's repaying savings of £300 a year, and that's then repaid back into the fund. Where are we now? Well, I can report that we've actually got 2 of the contract models up and running. And those of you who maybe noticed last week, MCR Pathways and Glasgow City Council announced one of the largest PSPs in Scotland, and that was based on the contract model. There is a contract in place in that says we as funders, and it's ourselves, STV Hunter and the Life Changes Trust, we came together and we said we will fund this if Glasgow City Council, if the outcomes are met, Glasgow City Council will take it for X periods thereafter, and they have signed up for that. So we have that model actually up and running. In terms of the debt fund model, the social bridging finance, Mr. Swinney commissioned a working group on this, and we're progressing now to having a trial on that, and we're speaking to one of the local authorities about how we could actually implement a model like this. So we're not far away from actually getting something to work and something on the ground. So in summary, our model, how would I describe it? It's a bit, and I think coming back to your analogy of the elephant, it's had an incredibly long gestation period, probably about 18 months, but we're nearly there. It has made progress, but it has been slow. So that's our model, and thank you for your attention.